Hi, everybody. Mitch Tannenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today for this week's Security News Update. Very first thing is going to be post-quantum computing. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, quantum computers are computers that don't work the same way traditional computers work, and they are very, very effective at breaking encryption. What that means is intelligence agencies worldwide have been collecting and storing data literally for years now, and they anticipate that they will be able to break the encryption and read whatever it was that was encrypted. Now, for some things, if you read it a year later, not going to be terribly useful. Other things, if you read it a year later, let's say it was, the plans for a new aircraft or a new battleship or something, still useful a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later. These things have lifespans in decades. So the government is putting together, there was an executive order under the last administration to start planning for what's called post-quantum cryptography. And with the number of things that they wanted to do, one thing was to build a list of software that has post-quantum cryptography and has different algorithms, different kind of algorithms in it that works for after quantum computers are out there. The thing that everybody is taking odds on, nobody knows, is when quantum computers that are what's called cryptographically relevant, meaning that they can break encryption, are going to be out there. Is it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years? Nobody knows. I am of the school that it's going to be sooner rather than later, like probably 3 years maybe, and that the intelligence agencies around the world are going to have these things long before they tell anybody about it, because obviously they've got no incentive to let anybody know that they've got a cryptographically relevant quantum computer out there and they can read everything you're sending. Remember, that's how we won World War II, right? We broke the German cipher, and it took them a long time, like after we sunk a boatload of boats, for them to realize, oh, they must have broken our encryption. It's going to be the same thing, literally the same thing this time around, except it's going to be with RSA and elliptic curve and stuff like that, where you think this stuff is encrypted in private, but it's not. And both sides, and probably a lot of private companies too, are collecting a lot of data with the hopes that they'll be able to decrypt it in a couple of years and figure out what's relevant. So the last administration told CISA that they had to have a list of software published and then after that maintained by last June. That's a couple months ago. This administration said we never do anything on time, so we'll give you another 6 months and get it done by the end of the year. What NIST is saying, or CISA is saying rather, that we will have it done by the end of the year, which is a good thing. If you haven't already started on figuring out what your post-quantum cryptography strategy is, and remember, unless you don't use software, you're still of the school where you have a number 2 pencil and a legal pad. This is relevant to you. And if you need help, please contact us, because it's a pretty geeky subject, but it will definitely have some effect on things. There is a startup in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, that claims to empower governments, and they're empowering governments to break into your computers and phones. They're offering bug bounties of up to $20 million for different classes of bugs, and then they sell those. They don't patch those bugs. They sell them to the spies, or I would suspect anybody whose check clears, and that's what we've seen. That part of the world does not necessarily have a lot of ethics. So if your check clears, you can probably buy one of these bugs that will allow you to break into whatever it is you want to break into. Will they give them to hackers? I don't know. Um, you know, I think the answer is probably. So nothing to do about that, unfortunately. But that's something we're contending with. In the large language model arena, we're discovering pretty quickly that these large language models are easily exploited and can be made to do evil without a whole lot of work. They have vulnerabilities in the quote guardrails, which are being bolted on after the fact, because the guys that designed these software products that use large language models didn't worry about security at the time, figuring that's somebody else's problem. But as you well know, you can't bolt on security after the fact, which is exactly what they're trying to do, and it's not working so well. This is not directly a cyber risk, but it is a risk, and that's the risk to business continuity. That's the risk. So as a result of the tariffs that are going on and all that stuff, apparently the new tax and spend bill is expecting other nations to calculate and collect tariffs for us and remit them to us. Well, these other countries like um, Australia, India, Japan, South Korea, and others are saying, well, we don't really understand what it is you expect, and we're not sure we actually can do it or want to do it. So what they've done is they've just stopped accepting shipments to the United States. That's a way to limit their liability. As a result of that, if you are dependent on a supply chain that is using one of the mail services from other countries, in other words, you're not buying a container load of something or buying from people in the United States that buy by the container load, there's going to be significant delays, and your business continuity strategy needs to comprehend uh, what happens if you can't get raw materials. If you're a uh, factory that makes clothing and your yard goods comes from overseas or your thread comes from overseas and you can't get any of that, what are you going to do? How quickly it's going to be cleared up is unclear. It's clear that there are a lot of countries who are not terribly happy with the United States at this point. And so I don't know how quickly it's going to clear up, but once the inventories that are in the United States dry up, get used, then this is going to have a much bigger effect. And it's going to be spotty, right? It's, oh, we got, 3 months worth of this particular thing, but we only had 2 weeks worth of this and it's gone. So plan for that, figure it out. This is probably not the last time this is going to happen. And then you'll be ready. In the CMMC arena, kind of big news. People have been waiting for this last part of CMMC called Title 48, which is the contract language that goes in contracts. It was the rulemaking process is very archaic in the government, but the very last step is it has to go through an organization at the OMB called OIRA. They review it and format it for publication in the Federal Register. They completed that task and actually a very short number of days. Normally, they can take up to 90 days. It only took 38 days because the rule is pretty short. And they sent it back to the Pentagon to get it published in the Federal Register. We anticipate it will be published in the Federal Register in the next week or two. At that point, we don't know exactly because, again, that rulemaking process is pretty opaque. It could take as long as 60 days to take effect, or it could take effect the day after it's published. People are leaning towards the shorter time window, but we don't really know. But nonetheless, worst case, 60 days. And we don't think that the Congressional Review Act applies here because this is not considered a major rule because it's just some contract language for the part of CMMC that's already in effect and has been in effect since last December. So stay tuned. We'll know maybe this week, maybe next week, what's going on with that. But as a result of that, there's a lot of CMMC news and newsletter this week, so check that out. In the reference department, this was a new acronym to me called CNAPPS. It stands for Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. It's a way to have a single pane of glass to check on and manage the security of your various clouds, since a lot of people have more than one cloud. Microsoft is the only cloud provider that's also in the game of selling these apps, but there's plenty of other folks that are selling the apps. Microsoft supports Amazon itself, obviously, and Google, the big three, but then supporting the little players. Obviously, if you have developed apps internally, then you'll need to go off and integrate that into your CNAPP. But kind of an interesting tool. Gives you a single pane of glass to check things out. In the important issues department, there's a piece titled "The Risk of Playing the Crypto Game." And in this case, I'm talking about cryptocurrency, not encryption. Um, let's ignore the politics of this for a minute because that's not germane to the conversation. Right after the president was inaugurated, you may remember that he released a crypto coin called Dollar Trump, and a few days later, the First Lady issued a coin called Dollar Melania. Well, his coin traded as high as $75 at one point, and her coin at one point in time traded as high as $13.73. But that $75 coin is now $8.39, and that $13 coin is now 20 cents. So if you bought it right at the very beginning before it skyrocketed, and then you sold it right away, well, you made some decent money. On the other hand, if you bought it, a day or a week after it launched and you paid $75, you're kind of screwed because now it's worth $8, and that's not the way you get rich. Who won? Well, the companies that were dealing with the trading of those coins, they made about $100 million in trading fees. So they're fat, dumb, and happy. They don't care whether the coin goes up and down. Their money comes from the trading. And then the president made $300 million from licensing fees. So he doesn't care what happens to the coin either. So there's $400 million that got sucked out of investors' pockets, or I call it investors, right? The thing about this is like an IPO in the stock market, except the IPO fizzled, which that does happen from time to time. Typically with IPOs, you have to be an accredited investor to go buy into those things, meaning that you're sophisticated and you know that you run a risk of losing all your money. The people who bought these coins are not accredited investors, do not have the sophistication necessary to understand that they could lose all their money, and they kind of got the shaft. Whereas the people who were pushing these coins, they made out by bandits. And this has nothing, that's why I say it's not related to politics. This is all, how the cryptocurrency world works. If you get in at the right time, get out at the right time, good for you. On the other hand, if you don't, not so good. Also in the important issues, Citrix one more time is under attack, and we're seeing some big players that use Citrix that have gotten compromised. There are two bugs. One of them is rated at 9.2 out of 10. The other, actually it's three bugs. The other two are rated 8.8, 8.7. These are similar to the Citrix Bleed and Citrix Bleed 2 attacks, but different. And we are seeing these things being exploited in the wild very effectively. And it applies to both supported versions of Citrix and unsupported old versions of Citrix. In the legislative and legal area, this is kind of interesting here. Those spam text messages that you get all the time, they're about to become illegal in Texas. Adding to that, the Texas law that makes it illegal, basically, they're considering this another form of spam, and it's anti-spam, law. It gives consumers a private right of action. So, if you're counting on the fact that the Attorney General Paxton is busy running for governor or whatever, senator, whatever he's running for, and doesn't have time to go after you, it doesn't matter, because what you can get is these ambulance chasing attorneys who are going to band together a group of folks, get a little bit of seed money, and they're going to go after people, and they're going to, say, I want $1 bazillion, and people are going to settle because, they can't afford the legal fees. And they're violating the law, so the defense is not very clear. Well, how you would defend yourself. Not being familiar with the law is probably not a defense. Not knowing that the person is in Texas is not a defense. But, unsolicited commercial text messages are going to be a problem. The law went into effect today, so it's in effect now. And, the only reasonable defense is get people's permission, which some companies do, a lot of companies don't do. But just a word to the wise, if you're sending text messages to people in Texas, you got a new risk to deal with. The U.S. is warning tech companies to not comply with other countries' laws, their hate speech laws. That really puts the tech companies between a rock and a hard place. And I don't know how this is going to turn out. Part of this is going to be a big game of chicken in terms of who's going to say that my law takes precedence over your law. Um, will the EU and the UK start fining companies? Will they start blocking traffic? I don't know. But it only affects really the big companies because they don't care about the little guys. But if you use one of them, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Next, you may remember a couple of months ago, a number of Russian ships dragged their anchors and tore up both fiber cables and electric cables in the Baltic Sea. The Finns and something you expect to see in the movies raided one of the Russian ships, the Eagle S, in the middle of the night with commandos landing on the deck of the ship, rappelling down from helicopters. And they're now taking the captain of the ship to court. They're trying him, and they have recordings of phone calls or text messages, I'm not sure which, but one or the other, where the Russians told him to destroy the evidence. And so, if he's saying this is benign, then it's going to be hard to explain why he's destroying evidence and why the Russians told him to destroy evidence. So this will unwind over the next couple of months. But I think initially people said it was malicious, and then for whatever reason they changed their mind and said no, it's a hack sandwich. I never believed for a minute. That may be designed to catch people off guard, which apparently has worked. So now we're back to it was malicious, and we got the evidence that it was malicious. So not good for the captain. He's going to probably be in jail for quite a long time. We keep reporting about insider threats, and I'm not sure whether we're seeing more of them or just being reported more, or I don't know, one or the other. But last week we talked about a soldier in El Paso who tried to sell secrets about the Abrams tank. He wound up trying to sell that to the FBI. Didn't work out so good for him. Now there's an Army captain at Fort Stewart who's even more I don't know what the word is, but more arrogant, I guess. That's probably not the best word, but it's close. He didn't try to sell secrets about the tanks. He just tried to sell the tanks themselves, not really tanks. He was selling skid loaders and UTVs and trailers and generators and welders, and they just stole them and posted them for sale on Facebook. One was a skid loader, and he drove his personal truck on base with a big old trailer. He drove the skid loader onto the truck, drove it to a parking lot somewhere, sold it to a guy for $22,000. Pretty ballsy, I would say. He is now in prison, so didn't quite work out as well as he might have hoped. In the education department, the recently passed crypto law called the Genius Act, it has stuff in it about what the banks and the Treasury have to do about regulating crypto. In particular, they're talking about regulating stablecoin, which is kind of like, they would like you to think it's kind of like U.S. currency. I have a totally different opinion about that, but that's for time for another conversation or another time. But right now, the Treasury Department is making regulations for folks that are issuing stablecoins, and it makes the Bank Secrecy Act look like child's play. In fact, the Treasury is actually getting to rewrite the Bank Secrecy Act to deal with stablecoins. And obviously, anybody who is concerned with privacy, and hopefully not malicious privacy, but just doesn't want the government in their stuff, is going to stay far away from these stablecoins because of that. And obviously, the bad guys, unless they're really stupid, definitely will stay away from stablecoins because this is going to be regulated dramatically. So yes, this is supposedly the crypto president, but boy, if I was a crypto entrepreneur, evangelist, I wouldn't go anywhere near any of this stuff that they're regulating because it's going to be, first of all, regulation is expensive, so somebody's got to pay those fees. And second of all, the reason why people like crypto is it's private, and this is not going to be private. In the breaches department, the farmers insurance companies announced that they got hacked. The hackers stole data on about a little more than a million customers. One more time, the hackers breached a third-party vendor of farmers. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Keep saying, deal with the third-party risk because it's where they're going, because they know that these third parties, their cybersecurity is horrible. And stuff always taken was the usual stuff, driver's license and birth dates and stuff like that. So, all that's pretty much stuff that's already been stolen many, many times. Um, so the risk factor is low. Obviously, farmers is going to get sued, but um, and we may find out, over time that farmers really, and this wouldn't be the first time this happened, farmers didn't really understand what the guys got. And I'm thinking that because they know what platform was compromised, a third party platform, they know what was in that platform. So, they say it wasn't horribly sensitive, but we'll see. A Bitcoin speculator got socially engineered out of $91 million in Bitcoin. You would think that somebody who has figured out how to amass $91 million worth of Bitcoin is smarter than a fifth grader. Apparently not. And is now out $91 million bucks. Now, Wyoming, and, because I've talked about this recently, they have stablecoin and it's not quite released yet, but it's pretty close to being released. And, the stablecoin is backed by 102% of whatever they issue in coin in negotiables like cash and treasuries and stuff. But the question I keep asking is, let's assume that the software is compromised or you get socially engineered. Is the state of Wyoming going to go off and make you whole? The answer is no, it's not. Unless I missed something that's really, really big, which I don't think I did. The state of Wyoming is not going to make you whole. So, this is the challenge, right? If someone breaks into your bank account or socially engineers you even to give them money, for the most part, you're going to get your money back. And in some cases where you won't, but for the most part, you will. And this is not there. So it's not clear to me exactly why you'd want to go do this. And you can't speculate because it's pegged to the value of the dollar. So, if you want to speculate, buy dollar bills. You can buy them at face with no service charge. And they'll go up and down just the same way. Both the states of Maryland and Nevada announced breaches that took down some state services. Nevada is a bigger play in this game. Nevada has now asked CISA to come help them figure out how much damage the bad guys did. They don't really know, I don't think. The Office of Emergency Management in Nevada has stood up a website to give residents information. The list of agencies that are on that are now affected is dramatic, is long. There are some agencies that apparently used a different platform that weren't affected, but there are dozens and dozens of agencies that were affected. And, now that the government has stopped spending money, the feds have stopped spending money with the states to improve their security, you should assume that we're going to see more and more of this. And, the hackers are going to get more brazen, um, so expect this. And I don't know how to prepare for it, but just expect it. Decentralized finance platform, which is another version of cryptocurrency, really, or a way of moving cryptocurrency around. A company called BetterBank.io was hacked. The hackers exploited, again, a software bug. The bug had been called out in an audit. The hackers stole about $4 million. They gave back about 2.5. Kept a $1 million+ bucks for themselves as a bonus. The bank's excuse was, well, either the auditors didn't tell us that the vulnerability was there. That's trivial to determine. In court, you go look at the report. Yeah, it's right there. What are you talking about? Or they're going to say, oh, gee, the auditors didn't make it clear to us, how bad it was. That's not the auditor's job. The auditor's job is to report the information. It's your job to figure out what the implications of that are. You certainly ask them their opinion, but that's your job. So I think from a lawsuit standpoint, and they only lost $1 million, so not too terrible. But I'm sure they're going to get sued, and I'd be interested to see what their defense is. We're stupid. We didn't read the report. TransUnion says that millions of customers' data was stolen. Again, one more time, it was stored at a third party. I don't know how many times I can say third party in 1 week, but third party. It's about 4 million customers' data. They claim it was not the credit reporting data itself, but other data around that. So it sounds like um, data related to people who communicated with them, who filed a dispute, or I don't know, stuff like that probably. But 4 million customers' data stolen. All right, onto the daily blog. Number one, the newest software is called software as a service is called impersonation as a software as a service rather. And what we're seeing is yeah, they're now building these tools that allow you to impersonate people's identity. People meaning like you and me, and this is offered as a service. And so it's kind of like going into the Chinese restaurant and saying, I want this, the one from column A, one from column B, two from column C. You glue those together, and all of a sudden now you have a cyber attack. And oh yeah, by the way, stay tuned in a second. Here's AI run. Not good for the defenders. Certainly not good for the people who are ignoring defense. It looks like Anthropic is going to settle a lawsuit which had the potential to be valued over $1 trillion, not billion, not million, $1 trillion. And part of that reason they're settling is they certainly don't want to create a precedent which would make other lawyers bolder. Although I still think the fact that they're settling is going to be important to other lawyers. But still, we'll see. What we don't know is whether or not the plaintiffs in the case are going to be willing to accept however much money, which we don't know what that is yet, that Anthropic is willing to throw at them. Are they willing to throw $1 million? My guess is, yeah, people aren't going to settle $10 million and $100 million. I doubt it, because there's 7 million works that were infringed. So $100 million would be what, $15 per author? Probably not terribly enticing. $1 billion, that's $150 per author. Still not terribly enticing, but we'll see where that goes. As I said, AI is here to help you. Well, maybe not so much. What we're seeing here is that hackers are using AI to completely run attacks, from the planning of the attacks to the finding of the marks to the creation of the scripts to the interpretation of the data, all AI driven. What that means is it's going to be a lot easier to go run an attack. And lastly, the news bites. Musk is suing Apple and OpenAI over the fact that Apple chose ChatGPT over Musk's AI. I don't know they have much of a case there, but that's never stopped Elon in the past. So he's going to try to get some money out of that. A whistleblower has claimed that Doge made an unsecured copy of Social Security data outside of the federal security perimeter. Not so good. If that happens, we'll see where that goes legally. The FBI says China's Salt Typhoon attacked at least 200 U.S. companies, which is a bigger number than we heard before. Before we heard about 10 companies. Now that they're saying 200 companies. And ChatGPT is being sued over teen suicide. That could be a problem for big tech if they win their case. Now, one possibility is they quietly settle and hope this all goes away, which I'm sure is what ChatGPT is hoping. On the other hand, if the lawyer wants to make a name for himself or herself, and the parents of the kid who committed suicide don't need the money, this could turn into a bigger deal. So we'll see. And the social media platform Blue Sky is going dark in Mississippi over age verification. Mississippi has a pretty onerous age verification law with a big fine attached to it. And so, whether or not, other social media platforms do this, whether or not this expands to other states, not clear, but certainly an impediment to free speech. If we can help you, I know this is a long newsletter this week. If we can help you with any of this stuff, please reach out to us.